I'm Patricia Ezechie, and this is Proactive Empowered Careers, a space for thinking about careers differently, not as something separate from who you are, but as an expression of you and the life you want to live. Hello everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode. So in the last episode, we explored the idea of choice and what it means to move forward and progress even when you're not certain about what you're moving towards. You're not fully certain. But here's the thing. Recognizing that you have a choice, making that choice, and then actually staying with that choice once you've made it are not the same thing. And that's what I want to explore today. The whole idea of commitment. Now, commitment is one of those words that we think we understand, but I'd like to take some time to explore it a bit today. Because we tend to associate it with things like being focused, being disciplined, sticking to a plan, and following something through. So we almost imagine commitment as a straight line. You decide what you want, you go after it, you stay consistent with the action around that choice, and eventually you get there. But real life doesn't really work like that. Careers certainly don't work like that, and life doesn't work like that. And neither does change. Because we don't just decide and then it unfolds as planned. If only. Things shift. We change, you shift. Your energy might change. Your circumstances between wanting to do something and then actually being able to do it might change. Your clarity around your particular choice comes and goes. And confidence increases and decreases constantly for many of us. So in reality, you may try something, it doesn't quite work, so you try again. And you might question yourself, which might mean that you pause for a bit, and then you come back to it. And sometimes we may move forward, and sometimes it might feel like we've gone backwards. And I don't know what your experience is like, but it's very much the case for me that it has always been 3 or 4 steps forward and maybe 1, 2, and maybe even 3 steps backwards. So sometimes you move forward, and sometimes you may feel like you've gone backwards. And this is where commitment actually lives. It doesn't look like certainty, and it doesn't look like constant momentum. We're not always moving forward. Commitment often looks like and feels like repetition. We're doing something again and again and again, not because it's working perfectly, but because we've decided that it matters to us. I remember someone once speaking to me about something, and they said to me once that they'd applied for 39 roles and they hadn't got the promotion that they wanted. And the immediate instinct, a couple of things came to mind when I heard that anecdote. But this particular instinct from this person was, maybe it's not working and they should stop attempting to get the promotion. But this is where it's a bit more nuanced, I think, because the answer isn't to stop. It's to keep going. I said, to keep going 40, 50, 100 times if that's what you want, if that's what matters to you. But with a very important caveat. Not just repeating the same thing blindly, not just going, in this case, to interview after interview after interview and not making any changes. So blindly doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. I think we know what that's called, don't we? Yep, insanity. So no, this isn't insanity that I'm advocating. It's something slightly different. It's the learning part of this that I think this particular individual hadn't been incorporating into their process. It's learning and adjusting, noticing what works and what isn't, and what we might need to change. And then we go again from that position of increased information. Because commitment isn't just about persistence. I like to think of commitment as persistence with awareness. It's not just keep going, doing the same thing no matter what. It's stay with it if it really matters to you, and learning and refining and adjusting as you go. And this is where everything we've talked about up until now in this podcast starts to really matter. When we talked about listening to yourself and trusting what you hear, and our ideas about permission and congruence and choice, all of that stuff is about garnering information about ourselves, learning about ourselves, creating that awareness. And what commitment allows us to do is to use that awareness and to do something with it, to move forward, sometimes 3 steps forward, sometimes a couple of steps back, but to keep moving forward, using that awareness about ourselves and our choices and our permission structures and frameworks and our stories to help us to actually make progress and to move forward. So what is commitment actually about? For me, I think it's about staying in relationship with what matters to you. Even when things aren't fully clear, even when things aren't easy, even when it doesn't look like progress on the outside. It's that willingness to keep going for yourself, for what you're noticing, and for what you feel is true. We recognize that if something really matters to us and we're committed to achieving it or moving towards it, we might have to go through this thing more than once. And commitment allows us to keep coming back to our desired outcome with refinement because it means something to us. And that's the thing that I think is really important to acknowledge here. We're not just repeating things blindly without any idea of why or without any reason why. We're doing this because what we're trying to move towards matters. It's important and it matters to us. And I want to kind of pause here and break a fantasy that I often hear from people. And it's a story that many of us have absorbed, that somehow things should come together and to us more easily and more smoothly than they do. That if we're thinking about careers, that we should smoothly move from one stage to the next. And I'm not denying that for some people that is the reality, but not for many of us. The idea that careers that make sense on paper should just continue to unfold in this easy way without interruption. That progress is a straight line. That if something is right and we think it's right and we're doing the right thing, it should work quickly. But as I said, that's not how it is for most of us, for most people. Some people do have a charmed existence, but in reality, they're few and far between, in my experience. For most of us, there are pauses. There are moments of doubt. There are false starts. We change direction. We change our minds. There are periods when we're deeply certain about who we are and what we want, and other periods where we're less certain. And most of us are just figuring it all out as we go along. We're trying things, we're adjusting, we're coming back to what we've tried, and we're reworking it. And commitment is what keeps you and me and all of us moving through that process. And this is where something else that's really important comes in, and that's the idea of resilience. Because commitment isn't just about continuing blindly going forward. It's about how we continue. And resilience isn't simply about bouncing back and pushing through. It's about staying in the process without losing yourself in it. It's knowing how to keep going when something hasn't worked, and also knowing when something needs to change, or also when we need to stop doing something, when we need to adjust our approach, when we need to step back and reflect, when we need to pause rather than continuously pushing through. Because there's a difference between staying committed and staying stuck. And part of resilience is being able to tell the difference, to recognize, is this something I need to stay with and approach differently? Or is this something that no longer fits and needs to be rethought? And that requires us being really honest with ourselves and being in relationship with ourselves. Because commitment, without that awareness, you can see it could be exhausting. Going at something over and over and over again without increasing self-awareness, without increasing knowledge, that's the route to burnout. Making the same mistake, doing the same thing again and again without making any adjustments and expecting a different outcome. So commitment without awareness can be exhausting. But when we have resilience, and that resilience is grounded in our awareness, then it becomes something else. The repeating, the persistence with awareness becomes sustainable. It becomes something you can stay with over time because you're evolving with it over time and you're using discernment based on that knowledge of yourself to decide whether or not something is worth persisting with. And the beauty about commitment is that it's not just about the big decisions. If we think about it, it shows up in all the small moments of our lives. All the times we've got to come back to something that we've been thinking about, when we revisit a question, when we're having a conversation that we've been avoiding but we keep coming back to. And it's just about taking one step without knowing where it leads. So those baby steps. Commitment for me is those baby steps. And this is where it comes back to and fits back in with everything we've been talking about over the last kind of 10 episodes. The idea is about listening to yourself and trusting what you hear and giving yourself permission and understanding what success feels like, and recognizing what's congruent for you and navigating choice. All of that work is about garnering that information so that we can actually use it to begin to shape our careers and our lives. So I'd like to leave you with this thought today. If something matters to you right now, but it doesn't feel clear exactly what it is, or it doesn't seem to be working, that doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It might just mean you're still in the middle of working all of this out. And commitment and persistence with awareness is what will allow you to stay there long enough to make that shift. But a big part of that is the work we're doing here, that internal work of really beginning to create that awareness and understanding of ourselves. So in the next episode, we're going to pause for a moment because we've done a lot in the last 11 episodes. And I want to just bring together everything we've been exploring so far in a way that will hopefully help you make real coherent sense out of it. Because sometimes, as we've said today, before moving forward, it helps to see more clearly where we've already been and what we already know and what we've uncovered. So until we speak next week, take the very best care of yourselves. This has been Proactive Empowered Careers. If today's episode resonated, subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what comes next. And remember, your career isn't separate from who you are. It's an expression of you and the life you want to live.